Hey, everybody. I am so excited to have Jesse Molina here today with us. Jesse has worked in the corporate world for ad agencies and things like that, working as a creative director, senior art director, senior graphic designer within these ad agencies and boutiques. But for the last 6 years, she has been working solo and out on her own. And she works with businesses to create unforgettable and highly effective brands. And she's also a teacher. She has been working with young artists and designers at the Kansas City Art Institute now for several years. But most importantly, I have worked with Jessie. And so we found each other, and she helped me do a whole brand rethinking and redesign. And I was like, I just really wanted her to come and talk to us and share a little bit of her world with us. So, Jessie, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for the lovely intro.
It's always so strangely awkward to hear people do an intro for you. You're like, I don't know. I always feel like you have to just kind of like smile at the camera and
Social anxiety is a real thing, even if it's a recording. So it's funny that
oh.
so yeah.
Anyway, but I actually want to speak to you. So I am brand so ignorant about colors and create. We talked about this when we started working together, where I was like, I don't know how to see things. And it's so amazing to have someone with your skills and insight who can help us do this. But let's kind of start at the beginning, because right now you're also working and focusing with yoga people. And so can you tell us a little bit about, let's start with the yoga. How did you get into yoga? How did that become part of your work and your world?
Well, I come from a dance background, and I actually was going into the professional world in that capacity, and then I had the harsh reality of no health care and my body's giving out and so forth. And I was like, maybe, and then I also had a wide variety of interests that I would have to give up in order to actually succeed. And I wasn't willing to do that. So my first degree was in installation art. And then my second degree was in graphic design. So I started out in fine arts and then went to graphic design, which I found not only super refreshing because it gave me a system and architecture of understanding how visual design works that I can continuously build around, like till I'm dead. So, whenever that comes, and a lifetime of learning. And I really, the principles of design, the value based, I kind of became exhausted with self-expression because it was just always internal of me rather than providing value, which I think art is absolutely necessary and beautiful for a culture, but my priorities shifted. So going into design, I started working at this little boutique agency halfway through my degree, Novella Brand House, and kind of learned everything. There was only 6 women. So I picked up WordPress, I picked up social media, I picked up a little bit of copywriting because you're just a small company. Did a lot of illustration, and then came to the heart of what I really love, branding. I did move on to like advertising, but that killed my soul. So it really did. And I really enjoyed working directly with clients. I mean, if you work for a bigger company, it's separate, right? You don't even meet the client. You don't get to pick the clients in the capacity of their ethical backgrounds. So there's also some kinds of issues happening in that capacity. And then eventually I did work at a ad agency that I found comfortable, which it was comfortable for a little while, but I started the overlap technique because I always talked about it was like going to the gym, but you're not fully expressing your potential. You're just maintaining. So I'm doing clean typography and layout. Anytime you push the edge, it's always going to come back vanilla because that's what they want. But then I would go home and then initially work like 60, 70 hours a week. Yeah. And eventually that client list became a waiting list, my external. And then it just came to the point where I was like, push, push, push. And the capacity is like, you need to leave, right? And you're like holding on for your PTO and your health care. And you're like, no.
as
Yeah,
many of us listeners, the listeners will totally, we understand. Yeah. It's so understandable. Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes still, like
Mm.
it's a nice thinking of a safety net. But I think it was Brian Tracy. He's like an old school, like motivational speaker. And he said, you always sign your own paycheck wherever you work because you're the one creating value. And that always resonated with me. And then the illusion of the security of a job, like that advertising agency was bought by a Californian company and they sunk it and they fired like half the staff. So really
Mm.
security. And if you can find a job that overlaps with your goals and your values, fantastic. But Christopher Wallace, right, the tantric scholar,
Yep.
in Tantra Illuminated, he mentions the yogi. I'm gonna butcher this because his words are so eloquent.
He's
Uh,
so eloquent.
I know. Pretty much, the yogi must find something that fulfills the heart, right? And either their life activities or their work, or the rasa, or the sweetness of life will drain from you. Uh, and that was incredibly true in my experience.
Mm.
This all came from yoga, didn't it? Ashtanga yoga came into my life when I came to Kansas City, moved to Kansas City probably around 2010. I started going to Maya Yoga, which is where I teach now. And I guess I moved in because I haven't left. Um, Kathleen Kastner owned it at the time, and she was a huge inspiration. And she was one of those teachers that she was so sweet and she'd, talk to you, inquire about your life, but she also pushed you. So she's like, hey, you should come to Mysore. And I was like, I was still finishing my degree. And I was like, well, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, I'll see you tomorrow morning. And I was like, okay. But it was amazing. And then I fell in love with the structure of Ashtanga. Uh, I'm not someone who follows anything necessarily religiously. Um, I modify my practice because a lot of the Ashtanga extreme postures, I don't feel like my body would age well doing them. But I find the
Yeah.
system of those practices, just the sequence is brilliant. So, and it's now I've been practicing it for over 14 years, about 14 years. So it's been interesting to watch that practice evolve because it's constant, it's similar sequence, whether you're doing primary or second or whatever, but then your consciousness shifts and then the practice develops. Particularly fell in love with philosophy, yogic
Mm.
philosophy. Uh, I had primarily done Western philosophy and fell in love with that. But there's a lot of unanswered questions within Western philosophy. And uh, I also felt being able to embody the teachings in a beautiful way where you see it in your life. And I started out with the classic, like, Patanjali, right? Because that seems to be the hyper focus of most yoga teacher trainings and so forth.
I
And
like,
uh,
yes. And then moved on from the classics. Yep.
yeah, the classics, which those foundations are very important, even though it's like a
Yeah.
dualistic Brahmanical text, very much about separation of the body, Prakriti and Purusha. But that was the foundation of the evolution into the non-dual teachings. And I stumbled across Christopher Wallace, uh, just as micro meditations. And I just fell in love with his teachings, which is funny because I had Tantra Illuminated, but I was also a book hoarder at that time. So like, this is not the Matrix where you just absorb information. You must like by touching
I
things.
wish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of dabbled, and it's definitely maybe I needed more depth, in my practices to get there. And then I absolutely fell in love with Tantra Illuminated, the text, the recognition sutras, and I'm
Mm.
blessed to work with Tantra Illuminated now as a graphic designer. And they're such a wonderful, beautiful team. And then just by working within the yogic field, I kept on getting yoga and wellness clients, just by word of mouth. It's originally a small artisan clients, like a small business artisan makers. So usually higher end products I originally was doing branding for, but they were hand done, they last generations and so forth. Madison Flitch is an artisan furniture maker that I think one of his tables was more than the entire package cost because, but it will
Wow.
last hundreds of years, and it's such a beautiful piece. But
Yeah.
it started to shift. And now think it was Sean West, who's a podcaster. He's a letterer and a designer. He once said, whatever you fully invest in, it's going to be about 3 years before you see it take root, about 7 years till you see it blossom. And even though
Mm.
that's not like a countdown exactly 7 years, he's just giving a framework, right, of patience,
Mm.
patience to see it grow. And that was super helpful because Joseph Campbell says, follow your bliss. Later in his life, he was credited, I'm taking this from Near Enemies from Christopher Wallace, but
Yeah, yeah.
he was credited with possibly saying, follow your blisters, because the path is hard, especially when you're forging your own path. So,
Mm.
yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah, I
Here we
know.
are.
Yeah. And such a blessing to work with you. I remember stumbling upon your anatomy videos, and I was like, this girl knows her stuff. Let me take some notes. Yeah.
Well, so let's get into because so branding when I think it's really confusing out there for people who aren't in design and don't have, are just kind of coming into this world of marketing and marketing feels scary. So
Mm,
what is branding? How is branding different than marketing and what does
mm.
branding include?
So that's interesting. A lot of people think branding is the visual stuff, like the logo, the colors. That's actually called visual identity.
Mm.
Um, so there's an excellent book called The Brand Gap. And in this book, he has a wonderful way of describing the evolution of branding. So when we lived in small tribal units, right, and we started to grow, and we had establishments of services, everybody in the community knew each other, right? So there's a level of trust or not trust, depending on, the quality of your services, right? But if you were the baker, right, and you had excellent particular breads and you greeted everybody with a quirky, fun attitude, or you had reliable product, so forth, it cultivated an emotional loyalty, right? And a connection, a personality, and retained customers, right? So as we started to grow even bigger and bigger, right, that kind of level of intimacy isn't really available. There are still companies that have been mom and pop shops that have been around for a long time with a reputation. And honestly, their word of mouth and reputation is more important than how their logo looks. They're going to have clients because of word of mouth,
Right,
right?
right.
But when you're coming into a global space of competition, that's how you start creating it. And actually, in this text, he's really great about saying your brand is not who you think you are, it's what other people perceive you as. Now, you can guide that, but that means you need to have consistency. You need to be authentic and lead with those values you have, right? I use always Patagonia as an example. Uh, so they're an outdoor wilderness brand, and they're continuously apologize for that. Someone has somewhere to go. Uh, they, they're outdoorsy and so forth, and it aligns with their brand that they support, promoting, uh, advocating for climate change, right? Not for climate change, but helping
Right.
in certain aspects of it. So even when that huge Trump tax cut came, all of the benefits they received from that, they donated to specific
Mm.
nonprofits. So what did that do? I don't buy Patagonia, but I respect them, right? If I did buy Patagonia, that then re-supports, reinforces, my brand loyalty to them, right? And so really you're building a relationship of trust, right? And so from that, there's multiple factors. So you first want to think about where you are now, what your community would say about you. If you're brand new, what you would like your community to say about you. Who's your target audience, right?
Mm.
Uh, what kind of voice would you like, and how would you like to sound to others? So in the tonal voice, are you friendly? Are you more academic, professional, quirky, all these different aspects? What is your tangible impact? So, and what is your intangible impact, right? X factors, what makes you different? I also like the unity factor, what brings people together. And this all stems from the concept. There's a new concept that I particularly enjoy called the brand heart, right? And so instead of focusing, this is in marketing, of creating desire, right? And awareness and saying you need something, right? You instead pay attention to what your consumers need, value, and will emotionally resonate with them.
That seems powerful because it feels
Yeah.
like, and it's a nice way to think about it as opposed to feeling like we're always selling a commodity. You know what I mean? It feels like it takes it more into, makes it more, a little bit more human and connected rather than so much selling things feels a little impersonal, but connecting to someone's heart and what they need feels more
Right.
intimate.
And it's perfect for yoga because, the view practices, right? The third of it is when you start to shift your alignment from what can I get, right? To what can I give for the benefit of all, right? And then you start to think about that and resonate with that. Every single time I've lost all motivation, burnout to the maximum, every single time is because I've gotten away from the original heart, the original meaning of what I started doing and why I started doing it.
Mm.
And so I'm always someone who prioritizes that over money. Um, Money, of course, we need it. It's essential in our society. But we also are in an American society that very much is based on marketing, either A, creating desire or selling inadequacy. Um,
Mm.
which is the complete opposite of yogic principles, selling desire. I mean, that's a whole nother topic. We can just talk about that because it depends on what lineage you're talking about and everything. But yeah, so usually after this is established and you're kind of working with your core values, right? Um, what kind of impact, are you looking to help people that are suffering from trauma? Are you looking to help people, if it's just physical fitness, that's great. That's a very, very important part of staying healthy and happy, but taking it to a deeper level, and just really understanding it from their perspective. So once you're starting to brainstorm all these, right? This is what I do when I work with clients too. I have like these in a chart, right? And then I'm asking them for feedback and I call it the brain vomit. You just vomit this. Don't
I
worry. Just
remember the brain vomit. I
yes,
remember that.
yes. And then we circle 3 and then we select 1 and it creates your brand value and your mission. And then you start to go into visual identity from there
Mm.
because you can create something beautiful, but if it doesn't hit your target audience, it's not going to work, right? And
Yeah.
then it's frustrating, probably spent a lot of money, so forth.
Mm.
And a
I
lot of
love
people,
this because it's having people come back to what's authentic. And I bet that this process, Jesse, and tell me if I'm right about this. My experience, though, was that this process of working with you to go through this is very clarifying for your clients that you're working with because they might never have really thought about, oh gosh, how do I put this into words or what really are my values, and what what is my voice and who is my target audience? And it's
right.
actually a self-discovery process while you're doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a beautiful way because we think negatively typically depending, I guess, if you work on Wall Street, you might not look negatively on the word capitalism, but uh, but in the capacity of transactional relationship, each party exchanges for something they find more valuable than what they gave. And then there's a symbiotic relationship, right? And then, and that's a beautiful thing, right? Um, and so when we were exploring, just thinking about all these things, um, narrowing it down, and then usually I recommend people walking into that imaginary landscape, right?
Mm.
And the process of, you know, whatever it is, it could be Care Bear Land, it could be the Northeast, it could be whatever you feel resonates with your brand. And that's how I usually generate the first initial brainstorming process for visual identity. So visual identity, I always describe visual identity and branding kind of like one of your good friends, right? So the logo, right, is their face, but your friend's not just a face, right? Like not a floating face, right? Uh, but there's qualities and attributes, the tendency that they have in how they speak, what they wear, what their values are, and so forth. And this embodies and creates a relationship. In the same way, your visual identity starts to represent that. And consistency allows consumers to immediately pick up, oh, this is what I'm looking at. This is the product. This is the brand I know. Of course, everyone knows, those basics of using consistent colors, typography, but it really depends on the flexibility of your brand too. Like a bank.
Well, yeah. So what does that mean? Flexibility. Yeah.
So, for example, a bank, right, is not going to have a lot of flexibility in their brand because they're looking to be sturdy, reliable, traditional, right? So they're probably not going to use more than two colors, probably. Usually, it's probably going to
Blue.
be blue or green. Yeah, blue or green, right? Uh, their logo's never going to shift or modify or change. And then MTV. I'm thinking of MTV, and since I'm older, like in the 90s or 2000s, so I'm not sure what they're doing now, but you know, they would animate their logo and then there'd be like all these colors and contemporary. That's a very flexible brand, but it still has cohesive guidelines, right? And so
Right.
kind of establishing how flexible you want your brand. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have consistency. When you start opening the brand, there's going to be a pattern of how you use it regardless. And that pattern becomes intriguing, right? Because it's always the hard part. You have to hit your target audience. So you're using this visuals language, but then you have competitors, right? That are trying to do the same thing. But then how do you stand out, right? How do you stand out? Because yoga is one of the most oversaturated markets I can think of. So just the
Mm.
explosion of yoga within the last 20 years. So distinguishing yourself. And I also think of patience too, because you were talking, one of the questions, I was
Mm.
reflecting on earlier was because you were so kind to send me some previews um, for social media. And we tend to want everything now. But just understanding that I always think of even from like a basic yogic posture that is more difficult, especially with like headstands or whatever, or investing in social media. It's a long-term investment where
Right.
I think of those old architecture buildings. I think it was in Leuven, Belgium, beautiful old building, and it took like 4 or 5 generations to build it. And then the Romans burned it
Wow.
down. And then they rebuilt it over 4 to 5 generations.
Oh my gosh.
I was
Those
like,
Romans.
yeah. But I was like, but it was beautiful and it was sturdy and just the amount of foundation that was there. So
Mm.
slow build. And so, yeah. So it's a kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's so interesting that I think should be, for folks listening, that is such an important lesson of patience because we're past the point where there's oh great, put out the viral video and immediately the world's at your feet. I mean, you could put out a viral video and the world will not be at your feet, even if you do. And then what are you, is that you? Is that authentic? Or are you just, because you can make something that's, I was thinking about the difference between character and celebrity just
Mm.
recently. And like you can do things that could increase your fame or celebrity, but is that actually in alignment with your character, which is why it's so beautiful that you start with the values and let that guide you. And I feel like people are always asking me sometimes, they want to know how they should market themselves. Like someone, I had a question from a yogi once. She's like, but what should my niche be? And I'm like, that's the wrong question. Like you have to uncover, it's like this co-creation process of figuring out what your teaching style is when you're a baby teacher. Not that you can't have some ideas and follow those impulses with your target audience, but it's not like, oh, I'm going to hang out my shingle as this because I think it'll be popular, but to start from who you are and let that build over time, and to have the patience to, like you did with your transitioning job, like the overlap, like yogis out there do the overlap, like don't quit your day job and slowly build and
Yeah, because
create that strong foundation.
gotta take time to find those people, right? Um,
Yeah.
you can strategize and find those people, um, but you're only going to have enough stamina to follow the viral trends and the silly things unless they really fill your heart and you really enjoy doing them. That's going to run out your energy for that. You need something that replenishes your energy, right? And
Yeah.
something that people's relationship with social media. So I'm actually pretty off hands with my personal social media. So
Yeah, let's
I'm not
talk
really,
about that.
I don't have to really, the word of mouth has been pretty strong. So, I mean, I have done marketing for my clients. I do social media for clients, but personally, just for my own personal health, you know, like I want to be
Yeah,
grounded where I am most of the time. And so, and there is that part of us that is like, we have that primate instinct, we kind of get sucked into it. It's designed that way. And I also think you can create very healthy relationships with social media. But I'm not actively without clients, right? So, um, in the capacity of searching for clients and promoting it, that isn't, if unless you're staying local and you're really working with word of mouth, right?
yeah,
Because it's powerful, extremely powerful. If you want to get into a global market, that's one of the important aspects of getting into a global market. Yeah.
is word of mouth.
Well, no, 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 no.
Oh,
Social media,
oh,
and
social media. Gotcha,
I'm
gotcha.
sorry, online presence, um, and
Yeah.
determining what's healthy for you. So
Mm. Do you have suggestions around people like healthy boundaries? Because I think that's a big question out there for people, because how do we establish healthy boundaries with social media when it's part of our business? And
right.
again, I've had people say, I just want to work at my local studio and do that. I'm like, you don't need to do it then. You don't need to do the social media thing. But what do
I
you think, Jesse? What do you think is good for folks to think about?
There's also a new generation that loves being online in front of the camera, and
Mhm.
it's part of their life. If that's you, rock and roll, go for it, right? If you're more somebody who wants to have an online presence and get following for your content, but you don't want to be like attached to the phone all day long, I usually recommend that they do content batching, right? So you create a system of content, right? Um, like a theme, for example. So perhaps the theme is the energy body or whatever it is. And then you break down different aspects of the energy body, and then you dedicate 2 to 3 exhausting days. Right? Um, right? And you just literally create, say you're doing the koshas or you're doing, whatever, the chakras or whatever. And then you go ahead and bust out that content, right? When you do photography, you do it in huge batches, massive batches. And so and you'll take that content, right? And then you can chunk it like little snippets, like key parts of it. And then you start organizing it and create a database. And then you can use platforms. There's tons of them. You can scheduling platforms. Like
Mm,
I use Flick, but I know there's tons of them. Uh, and that will give you the ability to schedule in ahead, right? You can even respond to first comments. It analyzes your hashtags, and hashtags do work. Um, you want to make sure your hashtags are relevant and you're aiming for a little at the top, as in like exposure. So for example, hashtag yoga, you're probably not going to rank, right?
yeah.
On the on the homepage or whatever. But I mean, you can put a few of those in, but you're looking for, like, if you're a very small business, you want to target those hashtags for, the smaller groups that have following. So that way you have a possibility of ranking, so forth.
Mm,
And those platforms allow you to see what's ranking, collect it. Honestly, I do think looking for hashtags is most effective just on Instagram, because then you go to the hashtag, you make sure that you go and see what kind of content pulls up under
mm,
that hashtag, and you're like, would this align with my content, right? Because it's not going to work unless it aligns with that content. So just different things. If you have the space to respond, it really does matter. Um, just from a personal perspective. Um, but if it drives you insane, your sanity is more important so, than responding to comments. Um,
mm,
but it does really help with brand loyalty, right? Even if it's just simple thank you, thank you, that's very,
mm.
or encouragement. Another aspect of marketing I like to bring up, and even in social media, um, well, first of all, in marketing, it's the email that's golden, your email list.
Oh, so people should make it a priority to develop their email list.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's
Okay.
free. Yeah. So, um, yeah, exactly. Email is highly successful, but you want to also, instead of what can I get, what can I give? Uh, so you are a fabulous example. You give so much amazing free content that
Mm,
immediately builds trust, right? Um, and then not only does it build trust, but it establishes your knowledge and your capabilities, right? And then people, when you do offer a product, are more receptive to it, right? And so
yeah.
the framework, Michael Hyatt, he has some books that are amazing for marketing, HYATT. Um, and he usually works with a model of you should provide value. I believe it's at least five. So say you're doing 5 posts, there should be value posts, 5 posts. And then if you're going to do a hard sell, do a hard sell on the last, that other post. Same with email campaigns,
Mm,
right?
mm. Yeah.
That builds trust. If you meet somebody initially and they're like, can you give me this? Right? And you don't really know them. Yeah, you're just
Yeah.
like, oh.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't done here's another thing too, just for folks out there thinking about marketing, and this definitely goes with that slow burn and that patience. My business too. I think I started it, I think officially 7 years ago. I think it was 7 years ago that I started my business. Yeah,
That's
but
right.
it's been the same thing. It's like most people, I used to do marketing, Facebook or boost posts and things. Um, And the posts that I would boost when I was doing that originally were all like they were value posts. They were me talking about some philosophy thing. Like it wasn't I didn't boost the sale posts as much as I boosted posts that were had something that was free because I figured if I got them, I was like if they like this, then they'll get on my newsletter list or whatever. They'll hear about the other thing, but this is what I want, how I want to introduce myself to people.
Yeah,
Um,
that's brilliant.
Way
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
But
And
now
you saw it grow.
yeah, and now I don't now I'm in the position with the way my business runs where I think there are places I definitely need to build and give love to, but I've done so many like I could say like a big chunk of my business is being is helping people with their yoga teacher trainings and developing curriculum. And I've done so many podcasts about that and written so many blogs about that, which of course didn't happen overnight. Everybody, it was like doing a bunch over a long course of time that now it's like that word of mouth thing. But on the internet, people can find me through these other means. And so
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But it
it's
takes
hard.
time.
Yeah.
7 years, right?
And
Oops.
sometimes with like design and art too, I remember feeling when I would look on Pinterest and like, or even like Instagram, but like, the world is just so prolific. How can I catch up? And I was like, you're looking at like not hundreds of thousands of billions, it's a lot. So it appears as if it's coming out of nowhere for them. But each
Yeah.
person that has that prolificness to them has been constantly, consistently working in small, tiny chunks until it builds.
Oh.
I think perhaps one of the best things I can recommend is there's a teaching in Buddhism where they talk about one of the barriers to spiritual progress is indecision. Uh,
Mm,
so there's the advantage of indecision where you're reflecting, right? You're reflecting on the benefits or the, um, oh, I should probably do okay on this. There's no stuff. Where you're reflecting on, is this beneficial? Is this not beneficial? So forth. But after that's done, there's a paralyzing effect that has it. It takes over, and then, or you're switching gears continuously not to see that seed take root. So it doesn't mean you can't pivot. If you're like, I absolutely do not want to do this. There's been definitely periods in my life, advertising, for example, I was like, I do not want to do this, and I'm going to redirect. But in order to have something take root, you have to stay the path for a period of time. And you're never going to see all the way up the stairs, right? You're never going to see that. You're going to go up a few stairs, right? You're going to see where you are, see how things are working. If it's beneficial to you and you feel like it's going in the direction that, feeds the soul and, obviously paying bills. But even the bills part, you could figure out a way if it really fills your soul.
mm,
Um, and then you have a choice to continue, continue, continue. Because it's just like a beautiful painting.
mm,
If you've ever just usually, well, at least for me, the art would evolve through process, right? And writers talk about this, like George R. Martin talks about this, where the story evolves as he writes it, right? So the original storyline starts to shift as the characters develop, as you develop, as your clients develop, as you have more resources. And so you're allowing a natural evolution, not strict path, but you have a direction that you're sticking to,
mm,
which I love too many things. That's always that's my advice because I was like, I'm going to be installation artist. I'm going to be a sculptor. I'm going to be a dancer. I'm going to be a painter. I'm going to, and then eventually, when everything fell in place, was when I was just focused on branding, right? But I was able to pull other things I love into it as well. So
mm,
that teaching resonates with me. I don't know if it resonates with anybody, but
mm. I
yeah.
love it. Well, there's like, you don't want to you don't want to be constantly pulling up your own roots. You're like, oh, because the plant might need a little bit more sunshine. It might need a little bit more time. It might need, to see to see what happens to it. And if you're always like, no, I don't like it, the baby plant, I want to be, you can never give it time to show what it could be. So
Right.
yeah, sometimes it's good to listen to those, like the pratibha, right? There's that impulse, like, to listen to that, but also to trust your roots sometimes and see what happens.
Yeah. And I think it's harder in a social media, like you said, celebrity driven
Mm.
culture. Um, Celebrity culture is interesting, to put it.
Little, little toxic. It's a little just a
Yeah.
little toxic.
But there's two forms. There's the value-based celebrity or popularity, right? And then there's the
Yeah.
communal, right? The communal that brings people together, that provides resources that are connectors. Um, but what's going to stand over time? There's a comedian, Josh Johnson. He's on like the
Mm.
Daily Show, and he always has these long narratives. And he was talking about celebrity culture, and he was like comparing it, like the meme that goes viral is like a goldfish lifespan, like just very quick. It might, hit that dopamine and you're like, ooh, right? And then there's the ones that are, a little bit more viral and then hit. But this is literally, It's working off your brain chemistry. And always what's going to stand is not a cookie cutter architectural house that was built in 3 days, right? My house is over 120 years old and it's still standing because of the craftsmanship, right? Because of the valuable content that created the structure of this house. Now I have to upkeep it, figuring that out as a millennial, but so slowly, but to think of your brand kind of like that. So, and especially those are the kind of consumers you want too. Not the ones that are just going to jump on another trend, right? They're going to come back to you for valuable content.
Mm.
It's about relationship. The whole thing is
Mm.
relationship.
Mm. So if we were going to kind of just, yeah, pull in some of those points, we started with relationship in the brand, you know, and then ending with relationship. And it sounds like some of the key things, it's value driven, you know, just to really have that anchor. I'm thinking like for people who are just coming out and they're like a little bit deer in the headlights, like, oh, this is new to me.
Right.
First of all, find yourself a Jesse, everybody.
Oh,
But you know, to think about really your values and who you're trying to serve, so it becomes less of a what do I want and more what I can give, and something that connects to and fills your heart, so that it's not a burnout scenario, but it's something that actually fuels you as you go. Um, Patience,
hard one.
patience, yeah, super hard one. Consistency, and then allowing ourselves to first have the roots, plant yourself for a bit, but also know that this is going to be an organic process and might take us somewhere interesting, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah. And there's as you grow, sometimes there's a frustration points. Like, I guess you could use the metaphor of growing pains, right? Or you feel like you're hitting walls. But a lot of times we're so hard on ourselves. My husband's really wonderful in helping me reflect because, I'll just be like, you know, I'll want to be able to like create a passive income line, do all these other things. I'm finishing my MFA right now, and then I'm thinking I should be better than I am. I should have more done than I have done. And he's like, have you looked at the last 3 or 4 years? Right. And also, that's the whole purpose of, the awakening process in yoga, right? Is just separating my self-worth from the growth process of, where I think I should be, right?
mm,
And trusting. Because when somebody is so kind and provides value, there's a mirroring effect, right? What was it, Radiohead a long time ago when the album came out? And I think what was it, Napster? It was the
oh,
MP3.
Napster. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, you could
came out
download
and
everything. Yeah.
all those artists were having trouble selling their records and they just put their record out for free and they said you could donate. They made more money than they've ever made before because of brand loyalty. Like people just giving
Wow.
money to it on their site. So that's the power of that relationship. And it's so easy when we look at the world, especially news and everything, to think that humans inherently are just taking. But in order to actually bring out the beauty, those aspects of humans, right? The best parts of humans, and I guess I don't want to say best, most beneficial parts of humans, to take care of each other is the facility of helping each other
Mm,
because we're always
mm.
helping each other, whether we know it or not. And I, I don't want to be in a world where we're not. So
Amen.
register to vote.
This is not a political
No,
conversation,
I know. I'm sorry. I'm
but
saying
no, I'm kidding.
how to vote. I'm not saying how to vote. Okay, you
So
can.
Jesse, I don't know. It's all insane. Jesse, where can people find you? So if they like want to check out your work and connect
Yeah.
with you, what's the best way?
So Chamakara creative. So that is not a phonetic spelling. So Chamakara in Sanskrit is aesthetic rapture. Uh,
Oof.
I love that word.
Just
Isn't it amazing? I love it ever since I found it. Um, And it's the ability of the vibrancy of being alive. So something will bring that vibrancy, and all of a sudden you're just awakened. It's not necessarily, it's you can feel beauty regardless of that, whether it's a foul smell or the blossoming of a flower, like the richness of being alive. I thought aesthetic rapture was perfect. And so it's if I was to do it, pronounce it incorrectly and more phonetically, Kamatkara Creative. So CAMATKARA creative.com, which I can, well, I
I'll
think you
put it
can,
in the notes.
yeah,
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 we'll link it up and everything so that people can
yeah,
find you.
yeah.
Great. Is anything else we should know? That's the best way to find you?
Yeah, yeah. I am on social media at the same hashtag, Shamakara Creative. Um, I rebranded, so that's still building. It's very much, I
Ooh.
haven't invested yet into that social media profile, but it's continuously growing. Uh, yeah. Uh, do you have any last questions?
I think I think we covered
Most of
I
it?
think we co I think we covered a lot. I would say um let's see. If there was someone's like, "What's my brand?" Do you have a suggestion? I know this is such a terrible thing because it's so complex, but is there like one thing you would leave them to think about? They're like, "How do I know what it is?" Is there one
What do
thing
you
you'd
care
say?
about? What do you care about? Like, what do you, I mean, this is something about what do you, I mean, are you somebody, usually people are attracted to yoga, other than the physical benefits, is because of their healing, its healing capacity, um, ability to connect with the body, or the fact that it provides them some kind of spiritual grounding, something like that. There's a reason. You didn't just pick yoga. If you wanted to make money, you would have picked a different career, like a lot of money. You'd be going for Wall Street or whatever, right? So there is a heart seed there. So it's uncovering it. And if you've forgotten it too, that's the power of sitting down and reflecting upon it. It doesn't mean that seed won't evolve or change or your values or so forth, like mine have. For a long time, from small business to artisan, and then I was thinking I wanted to work for like nonprofits like Center for Biological Diversity and places like that. Um, and then it just kind of evolved, right? But always going back to that, right? Because there's another great book called The Big Magic with Elizabeth Gilbert. She talks about uh, the act itself is the fruit, right? Creativity, right? Self feeds itself. And Swami Vivekananda also says love is its own fruition, right? So beyond earthly benefit, but earthly benefit does come, right? In the capacity, especially if you're into the tantric lineage, right? When you have that symbiotic relationship, right? And you have to trust and be patient. Those are two hard things, but worth it. It's worth it.
Worth it. Jesse, thank you. Well, that's so beautiful. Everybody, Jesse Molina, thank you. Jesse, thank you so much for coming in. You are just, I could listen to you all day long. I just love your spirit and
I watch a video
thank you.
of you before I teach to refresh my memory on the hips.
All right, until next time.
Bye.
And vote, everybody. Fucking vote. God.
I know.